Okay, so in today's session, which is day 2 of the 4-day series, we will cover 13 mathematical functions and 12 statistical functions. I hope you have opened your workbook. Let's go to sheet 1. So this is the sheet 1. Here I have a very simple data. I have publishers in column A and I have sales that the publishers have achieved in column B. If you remember in the last video, here, do you see this formula here? In the last video, I showed you how to calculate sum using this formula. Okay, I also mentioned that this is not the best way of doing it because right now there are 5 cells. Okay, what if I want to add one more? This is what I'm going to do, plus and this. So there are 6 cells. Imagine there are 100 cells. Would you type the address of 100 cells one after the other? So that is the reason why I said this is not an effective way to do it. Excel has a function specifically which is meant for this. It is called the sum function. The sum function returns the sum of the arguments supplied. So if I want to find the sum, what I have to do is type equal to, and then type the sum function and start the bracket. And you will see that the arguments that it is expecting is number 1, comma number 2. For people who are joining this for the first time, these are called arguments. And anything between square brackets is optional. Anything which is not within the square bracket is a required field. You have to give a field. Okay, these arguments can be numbers, cell references, ranges, arrays, constant, etc. The sum function can take up to 255 individual arguments. So number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, up to 255 arguments you can supply. Okay. Now, as you can look at this formula, the first cell address is B2. Yeah, this is B2. And the last address is B7. And all of it is in a sequence, B2, B3, B4, B5, B6, and B7. So you can actually write this as equal to sum start bracket. You can either use the mouse and select the entire range, or you can type B2 colon B7. That's your range. That's the argument that we are supplying to the sum function. Let's close the bracket and let's press the enter. See, it's the same value. So is this better or is this better? Obviously, this is better because if there are, let's say, 100 cells, then all you have to do is sum start bracket, the first cell, colon, and the second. Okay, so this is definitely a better way to find the sum in a big range, and this also saves your time. You do not individually add each cell to the formula like we did above. Okay, right. If you have to find the sum of just 2 cells, then using sum for 2 cells does not make sense. Will it work? Yes, it will. So sum start bracket, and if I do these 2 cells, it will work. I'll not use sum function for these 2 cells unless I have a provision where people or the user will be inserting rows in between. Then yes, I'll use sum. Otherwise, I'll just use this plus this. So you have to decide when to use the sum function and when to use a formula is equal to cell A plus cell B. Yeah. Now, I'm going to explain something which is very important. And this is important because we are working with formulas and functions. I don't know if you have heard the term which is called contiguous range and non-contiguous range. So I'm going to explain what is that. A contiguous range of cells is a group of highlighted cells that are adjacent to each other. For example, A2 to A7. So these are next to each other. So these become contiguous cell. On the other hand, a non-contiguous range consists of 2 or more separate block of cells. For example, if I click on B2 and then I press the control key on the keyboard and then I select any cell which is not adjacent to it. For example, B10, I select this cell. Okay, now the non-contiguous range has 2 cells in it, B2 and B10. So remember that the difference between contiguous cell and non-contiguous cell is contiguous cells are next to each other, non-contiguous cells are separated. They're not next to each other. Lot of Excel functions, they accept only contiguous range as arguments. Some, on the other hand, treats these as individual arguments. Okay, so for example, if I want to find the sum of, let's say, B2, yeah, and then I want to find the sum of 6th and the 7th row, I can do that. So I'll type equal to sum, start bracket, this cell, and then I press the comma, and then I select these 2. Yeah, so these are non-contiguous ranges. And if I press the enter key, I will get the sum. If I highlight this, and if I highlight this, and if you look at the bottom, you will see 3, 6, 7, 8, 5, 6. Okay, so it gives you the sum using contiguous as well as non-contiguous cells. So I hope the difference between contiguous cells and non-contiguous cells is clear. Okay, now you could not have done this using this formula. So you couldn't have done equal to this cell plus, and you select this cell. You can't do that. Obviously, now it is doing it this way because it is filling it, but then it will still not give you. It is making it an array. So we'll not go into this at the moment. I'll come to this later on, but it will not give you this method. This method will not give you the total sum. So remember, you can use the sum function when you're dealing with non-contiguous ranges. Now, what if I want to find the total sales for, let's say, AvenQuest software? Okay, so what I want to do is I want to find the sum with a specific condition. So how do I do it? Right now, when we were doing sum, there was no condition. I just typed equal to sum, and then I selected the range. But now I do not want that. I want the sum only where the publisher is AvenQuest Software. So AvenQuest Software is here and here. So I need this plus this, which is 2,50,020 rupees. So how do I do it? For this, the next function that we will use is called SUMIF. Okay, the SUMIF function lets you apply the criteria to one range and sum the corresponding values in the different range. So if I have to use SUMIF in this particular range, I will apply the criteria to this range, and I will use this range for the sum. Okay, so let's go to H2. This is the cell. Here I want the total sales for AvenQuest. So how do I do it? We'll start typing SUMIF, and then I'll start the bracket. The moment I do this, Excel prompts me with three arguments: range, criteria, and sum range. The range argument is the range of cells that you want to evaluate. So I want to evaluate this range. Okay, this is where I am going to check my criteria or apply my criteria. So I'll type comma. The next argument it is asking is criteria. The criteria in the form, it can be a number, it can be an expression, it can be a cell reference, it could be text, or it could be some other function that defines what cells will be added. So you can nest one function inside the others. You can also include wildcard characters. I'll come to that in a moment. So here, the range that I want to apply is A2 to A7, and the criteria is AvenQuest Software. Either I can type AvenQuest Software directly, or I can directly click on this cell. So that's my criteria. And then I press the comma, and then I have to find the sum range. So this is my sum range. So I select this and I close the bracket. Okay. And let's press the enter key. Let's see what do we get. We get 2,50,020. That was exactly the same amount. If you look here, 2,50,020. So remember, you can use SUMIF to find a sum with a specific criteria. Okay, I hope this was easy. Sum and SUMIF. Now let's come to the wildcard part. So here I was checking whether I wanted to get the sum of AvenQuest. Suppose I want to get the sum of all publishers which start with AVA, A-V-A. So what I will do is I will type AVA and the asterisk mark. Okay, so if I press the enter key, see what happens. I get 548,812. Let's check. So these three are AVA. This is also AVA. So let's select this and let's select this. It's 548,812. Let me take that example as well to show you how SUMIF work. So let's look at the range A17 to B23, which is here. So if Mamta is online, she will immediately see this. If people want me to zoom, okay, let's zoom it. So Mamta was asked this question. So this is the rule list and this is the records. So here the rule list is rule 1, rule 2, rule 3, and rule 4. So Mamta was asked, can you sum wherever the rule 1 is appearing? Can you give the total sum? So here rule 1 is here, rule 1 is here, and rule 1 is here. So 23 plus 2 is 25, plus 6 is 31. So this cell should have 31. Okay, rule 2. So here is rule 2 is here, rule 2 is here, and rule 2 is here. So 57. So how do I get this? I just shared with you how to use wildcards. You have to use the same method here so that you get these values. So I'll start typing is equal to SUMIF, bracket. The range is this. The criteria is now the text should include rule 1. So when you said, if you look above here, we were looking at text which started with AVA. Okay, and then it could have anything. But if I want to see something which contains the text, then I have to put the wildcard before and after. So if I do that, here is equal to SUMIF. This is the range, comma, and then I type the wildcard, ampersand, rule 1, ampersand, and the asterisk. So what I am doing here is I'm finding if rule 1 is there or not. Okay, and what is the sum range? This is the sum range. Let's close it. Let's press the enter key. See how I got this 31, which is the same as this. So what I will do is I will convert this to a constant. I already explained what this is. So I'll just do this. I'll come to dollar signs in a moment. And then I will drag the formula down. See, rule 2 has 57, rule 3 has 95, rule 4 has 61. So rule 4 is here, here, and here. So the total is 61. Okay, now coming to the dollar part. Okay, why did I put dollar signs? What did it exactly do? Now, since we are working with functions and formulas, you really need to understand what are these dollar signs. In Microsoft Excel, there are three kinds of cell references. Okay, those cell references are called relative reference, absolute reference, and mixed reference. Understanding how these cell references behave is very important, else you will not get the desired result. Okay, let me show you something. If I remove the dollar signs, I'm just going to remove the dollar sign, and then I will explain what these dollar signs are. Okay, one moment, almost done. and we press the enter key. Now, if I copy the formula down, see this number changed. Early, let me press Control Z. This was 61. It became 56. And if I double click on it, you will notice that the range has gone down. Here, the range was A18 to A23. Here, it was A19 to A24. Here, it was A20. So the range is moving down. That is the reason why I added dollar signs. Okay, now let's understand why is this happening. The first reference is called the relative reference. Relative references, when copied to another cell or across multiple cells, will change based on where you copy them. So here what was happening is when you copied this formula down, this address, which was A18 to A23, it changed to A19 to A24. These kind of references are called relative references. They change based on where you copy them. Now let's come to absolute reference. When you do not want a cell reference to change when copied to another cell or across multiple cells, you use absolute references. Unlike relative references, absolute references do not change when copied or filled. When you press the fill autofill, it doesn't change. To make a cell reference absolute, you have to add a dollar sign before the column name and the row number. So this is the column name, so I add a dollar sign before that, and I add a dollar sign before the row number. So $A, $23. Here as well, I'm doing that. Why am I making this address absolute? Because when I go down the column, I do not want this to change, but I want the D18 to change. So D18 should become D18 should become D20 and D21. But the rest of the range should remain constant because this is my range. It should pick up the values or apply the criteria on these range. Now, if I press enter and if I bring the formula down and if I double click on it, you will see that D18 became D19 because that was relative. But this range and this range did not change. It is still referring to the range that I wanted. Okay, so this is called absolute referencing. Now coming to the third referencing style, which is called mixed reference. So when one of the row or the column has a dollar sign and the other does not, then that is called a mixed reference style. Let's take the example of these. So if I say equal to AvenQuest, okay, I get this. If I move towards the right, I get 548812 because here it was G2, it was a relative address. It moved to the right, it became H2. But if I do not want the column to change, then I will put a dollar sign, okay, next to G, before G rather. Now, if I move it towards the right, see what happens. It copied AvenQuest. That means the G column is now absolute. It will not change. When you are moving horizontally, it does not make any difference whether you add a dollar sign before the row or not, because when you're moving horizontally, 2 is not going to become 3. The 2 will become 3 when you are moving vertically in a column, whether you're going up or you're going down. In that case, you can put a dollar sign in the row. And in that scenario, putting a dollar sign before the column does not make sense because when you're going up and down, the column will not change. So you need to understand what are these references. Now let me share an interesting trick with you. Okay, so I'm going to delete this and I'm going to press enter. So here we have G2. There's a shortcut key which is called F4. If you press F4, see what happens. The relative reference became an absolute reference. Press the F4 key again. You will notice that it became a mixed reference where the row is now constant and the column is not constant. Press F4 again. This time it's again a mixed reference, but this time the column is absolute, it's a constant, and the row is not absolute. Press F4 again and you will come to the relative reference. So remember this trick where you can cycle through the references using the F4 key. Okay, is that clear? I will not go too much into mixed reference. I will explain this more when I'm talking about the lookup functions in the next video. When I'm going to talk about VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, then you will understand the importance of the cell references. Yeah. In short, whenever you have a cell where the column is absolute, that it has a dollar and the row is relative, which means it doesn't have a dollar. So we have covered SUMIF. Let's move on to the next function, which is called SUMIFs. So this is SUMIF. Now we will add an S after SUMIF. So what does SUMIFs do? So we just covered SUMIF, and in that the thing was we had only one criteria. Here, if you remember, the criteria was AVA or AvenQuest. So there is only one criteria. SUMIF lets you specify only one criteria, but SUMIFs let you specify multiple criteria. Yeah. So let's say we come to this particular section, yeah, where we have publisher, genre, and sales. Okay. Now we have one more extra field, which is genre. Okay. What if I want to find the total sales for the publisher AvenQuest software for the genre shooter? So how do I do it? For such scenarios, we use SUMIFs. To understand this, let's do one thing. We'll directly start typing the formula. We'll do it here. I've already created a table. You can also do it here. So type equal to SUMIFs and start bracket. and you will see that the arguments have been shown to you. The first argument is the sum range. So this is the range from where you want the sum, which is this range, comma. If you understand how SUMIF works, then SUMIFS is very simple. The only thing is the arrangement of the arguments. Here, the sum range has come first. That's okay, it doesn't matter. Excel will tell you what it is expecting. So don't get worried. Oh my God, what should I put next? Don't worry. Just look at the hint that Excel is giving you. Next, it is asking for the criteria range. My criteria range is this. Okay, and what is my criteria? It has to be AvenQuest software. I can either directly type it or I can supply this range address as an argument. Okay, I press comma again. Now it is asking for the criteria range 2. So my second criteria range is genre, and I want shooter. Here I have only 2 criteria, but SUMIFs allow you to add more criteria if you want. So if there are, let's say, 5 fields, you can specify up to 5 criteria. So you can test that whenever you have such kind of data, but I'm going to show it to you with 2 different criteria. Let's close the bracket and let's press the enter key. And we get 1,25,010. Let's check. This is AvenQuest and this is AvenQuest. But here the genre is shooter and the genre here is sports. So it is only showing 125. If I copy the shooter and I paste it here, see the sum change to 2,50,020. I'll press Ctrl Z. So this is how SUMIF works. You can also try the same thing what we did with SUMIF. Here we had wildcards. We can do that here as well. So if I copy this, and instead of G27, which is the AvenQuest software, I can also use wildcards, and it will give me 241,547. So this is shooter, this is shooter. There are only 2 shooters, and this is AvenQuest, and this is Avalon. So the sum of this and this is 241,547. So you can also use wildcards in SUMIFs. So these 3 functions, sum, SUMIF, and SUMIFs, are part of mathematical functions. So if you go to the formulas tab, here we have math and trig. So it is part of mathematical functions. Before we cover the rest of the mathematical functions, we will first cover statistical functions because it will be easier to understand. And then we'll come back to the mathematical functions. Now, just like we have 3 functions to find sum, which are sum, SUMIF, and SUMIFs, we have 5 functions to return the count. These are part of statistical functions. These functions are pretty straightforward. Let's start with the count function. The count function, it gives us the number of entries in a number field. Okay, so for example, if I want to count the number of entries in the records, which is here, let's say 23 to 45, this is B18 to B23. So if I want to find the number of entries here, I have to use count. Okay, let's test it. Let's come to records first. So I will type equal to count, start bracket, and this range, and you close the bracket, and if you press enter, it will give you 6. Now I also want to count the rule list. So this is the rule list. What if I use count here? What do I get? I get 0. Here I got 6 when I counted this, but here I got 0. Why is that? That is because the count function will only work on a numeric field. Remember, so all these are numerics, so it will only give you the count of numeric entries. This is text, so it will not work. So how do I get the count of text entries? For that, we have something which is called count A. Now, if you press count, if you type count A and then you press enter, you will get 6. So remember, count A function counts cell containing alphanumeric values. It can be any type of information, including error values and empty text. Empty text is not the same as blank cell, remember guys. So if you press a space bar in a cell, that becomes an empty text. Okay. So if I, like I said, if I want to count the text, then I have to use count A. If I have to count the number of numeric entries, then I have to use count. Okay. Now let's move on to the next function, which is called COUNTIF. So these 2 functions, they work just like SUMIF and SUMIFs. The SUMIF and SUMIFs give you the total sum. The count and COUNTIF gives you the count. So COUNTIF counts the number of cells that meets a specific criteria. For example, I want to find the number of cells in range A2 to A7, okay, which have the text AvenQuest software. So visually, I can see there are 2 cells which have AvenQuest software. But how do I get the number of cells which have AvenQuest software? Okay, let's start typing. Equal to COUNTIF, start bracket, this is the range, and the criteria. Okay, remember the range is the range of cells where you want to apply the condition, and criteria is the condition that you want to apply along with any logical operators. Remember, you can apply logical operators as well. Now, what are logical operators? It is the greater than sign, less than sign, not equal to sign. I will come to these logical operators in a moment. You can also use wildcards like we did in SUMIF. We will see that also in a moment. Okay, so the criteria here is AvenQuest software. This is the criteria. This is the text. Remember, I have the ranges here. I can also type AvenQuest software and it will work. So let's close the bracket and let's press the enter key, and we get 2. So you can use COUNTIF to find the number of or the count of entries based on a particular criteria. So the criteria is AvenQuest software, and there are 2 cells. Okay, easy to understand. Similarly, if I want to count all entries that start with ever, then all I have to do is, let's copy it from here rather than typing it. Just copy this and just put that here. It'll work. See, I got 4. That means these 3 and here. In this range, there are 4 entries which start with ever. So that's how you can use wildcards as well in COUNTIF. Now let's come to something which is called a logical operator. So logical operators, this is less than sign, this is greater than sign, this is not equal to sign. Okay, so you'll never use equal to on its own, because here, if you noticed, before this we had G7, which was here, G19, sorry. So we don't say equal to G19. It is understood that it is equal to AvenQuest software that we want to see. Okay, so the logical operators are less than, greater than, this is not equal to, and then we have less than equal to, and then we have greater than equal to. These are 5 logical operators that you can use. Okay, so if I want to, let's say, find the sum of, we'll take this cell. Okay, let's say I want the records which are greater than 20. So what I can do is equal to COUNTIF, start bracket, this is my range. And what is my criteria? I am looking for records which are greater than 20. Criteria when you are typing greater than 20 is text. So it has to be within double quotes. I type 20 and I close the bracket and I get 3. So we have 23, we have 50, and we got 45. So there are 3 entries. Similarly, you can use any of these operators to count the number of cells that meet the specific criteria. Okay, now let's move on to the next function, which is called SUMIFs. Like I said, how SUMIFs work, you can also use COUNTIFs. So in this cell, I want to, let's say, count the cells where the publisher is AvenQuest software and the sale is above 1 lakh. So let's start typing equal to COUNTIFs, start bracket. Again, the arguments are pretty straightforward. Criteria range is a range where you want to apply the criteria, and criteria is where you want, is the criteria. Okay, so what is the criteria range? AvenQuest software. Let's say I select this, comma, criteria is AvenQuest. I'll select this cell, comma, criteria range is this, comma, greater than 1 lakh 345, and close the bracket. So it gave me the count of records where the AvenQuest software is there and the sale is greater than 1 lakh. Let's check. This is AvenQuest, this is AvenQuest. Both the sale is greater than 1 lakh. If I change this to 90,000 or 90, doesn't matter. You'll notice that it changed to 1. If I press Ctrl Z, it will change to 2. The next function that we will cover is the count blank, the last of the count series. You can use this function to count the number of empty cells in a range of cells. But remember, cells containing unprintable characters or 0 are not considered blank. So if you have space, if you have char 160 like we saw in the previous video, or we have a value 0, it is not considered as blank. This function is pretty straightforward. Let's say I want to find the number of blank cells in this range from A1 to A32. So all I have to do is equal to count blank, start bracket. There was a typo. Okay. And the range is A1 to A32. And we close this and we press enter, we get 5. Now, how did we get 5? So 2 here, 3 here, and 2 here. So there are 5 blank cells in this range. So this is how you use count blank. Now moving on to the next 3 functions to find the average. So again, if you found the sum, SUMIF, SUMIFs, count, COUNTIF, and COUNTIFs easy to understand, then these 3 functions also will be a piece of cake. These 3 functions operate exactly like those functions. These 3 functions that we will now cover is average, average if, and average ifs. Okay, these 3 are also part of statistical functions. Now, the average function, as the name suggests, returns the average, which is nothing but the arithmetic mean of the argument. Let's say I want to find the average of the sales, then how do I do it? Let's start typing and then we'll understand the syntax. Okay, so if I type equal to average and start bracket, the argument is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. You can type the numbers separated by a comma, or you can also supply a range, just like we did for sum, and you will get the average. So if you select this, if you look at the bottom, it is 138,183.67. And with this is truncated. So if I go back here and I add decimal points, I can see 0.67 as well. That's the average. Yeah. Now, if I want to find the average for the company called AvenQuest software, then you can do that as well. Okay, so I will type equal to average if, start bracket, the range is this, the criteria is AvenQuest, and the average range is this. Pretty straightforward, exactly like we did it in SUMIF and COUNTIF. Press enter, you get 125.10. So we are finding the average where the publisher is AvenQuest software. Yeah, that's what we did. If I double click on this, you will notice it's taking out the average of AvenQuest software. Similarly, you can use the wildcard characters as well. So if I copy this, if I paste this here, press the enter key, go back here, I'll directly copy the this thing. I'll not type it again. And in J18, I will paste this and I'll press the enter key. And you will get the average of all companies which start with AVA. So these are the AVA. Let's highlight this. This is also AVA. Let's highlight this. And the average is 137,203. That's what we got here. Just like we used SUMIFs, COUNTIFs, same thing is with average ifs. So here I want to find the average of AvenQuest where the sale is greater than 1 lakh. So how do I do that? Is equal to average ifs, start bracket. The average range is this. Just look at the arguments, guys. It will tell you what it wants. It'll give you a hint of what kind of range it is expecting. It's here it says average range, so we have to select the sales part. Then the criteria range. This is the criteria range. The criteria is AvenQuest software, comma. The next criteria is I want this cell, comma, sale greater than 1 lakh. One extra bracket, and we get the value. So if you want, you can also change it to whatever value you want. I put it as 1 lakh. You can try 1,50,000. Experiment with it, guys. Till the time you don't experiment, you will not understand this. Okay. The next 4 functions that we will cover will help you find minimum and maximum values in a range. These 4 are also part of statistical functions. The first function that we will cover is max. This function finds the highest number in a range. So for example, I want to find the max sale in B2 to B7. Okay, so I will type it here. So if I want to find the maximum sale, I'll type equal to max, start bracket, and look for arguments. So I select this range, I close the bracket, and I get the max number, which is 1,82,255. Okay, so now, just like we have maximum sale, we also can find the minimum sale. The function that we will use is min. Start bracket, select the range, close the bracket, and you will get the minimum sale, which is 1,16,000. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward functions. Yeah, max and minimum. Okay. Just like we have criteria for sum, for count, for average, you also have criteria for max and minimum as well. But like you have SUMIF and SUMIFs, you don't have max if. You only have max and max ifs. Similarly, you have min and min ifs. Okay, so these are the 2 functions that we will cover. Let's say I want to find the max where the name of the company is not, it does not start with AVA. Till now we were checking if it starts with AVA, but now we will do where it does not start with AVA. So let's start typing max ifs, start bracket. The max range is this, comma, criteria range is this, and the criteria that we want, let me drag this here. Sorry, one moment. It's not, yeah, now I can drag this here. Perfect. And the criteria that I want is it does not start with AVA. So it's not equal to. This is the operator that we did not use till now. So you can see how we are using this. AVA, asterisk, close the bracket, and enter. So here we are finding the max for publisher where it does not start with AVA. Just like we did max if, similarly, you can use min ifs. These are the very simple functions that I'm covering. I'll go to more complex functions shortly. Similarly, you can apply min ifs for publishers where it does not start with AVA. With this, we are done with the statistical functions. So let's go here for a moment. The statistical functions that we covered today is average, average if, average ifs. We covered count, count a, count if, count ifs, and count blank. Then we covered max, min, max ifs, and min ifs. So these are the statistical functions that we covered. Now moving on to 13 mathematical functions. I've already covered SUMIF and SUMIFs. Okay. We'll now move on to the other functions. Now, there are moments when you add numbers and you see a lot of decimal places. So to handle those, we will cover 3 functions: round, round down, and round up. These 3 functions. Let's tackle round first. Okay. So if you notice, I have a lot of numbers here with decimals. Okay, and these are the sales for the publishers, and there are a lot of decimals. I can see 6 places of decimals. So we will work with these now. Now, when you're creating reports or dashboards, you may want to round the numbers. Imagine you have a dashboard or a report where you're showing 6 decimals, 7 decimals. The report will not look nice. So you may want to now, let's say, round the numbers. Okay, so if you notice, the sum here also have decimals. Now let's round the result to 2 decimal places. Okay. Here I've already done it for you. It's very simple, round. Okay, let me do it again. Equal to round, start bracket, and it is asking you for the number. Either you can type the number or you can give the cell reference. And how many number of digits do you want to round it to? Okay, the number of digits to which you want to round it to, let's say, is 2. So you type 2, close the bracket, and you press the enter key, and you will get 0.57. Now you will say, Sid, it's showing 000 as well. Yes, it is showing you because of the cell formatting. But the number has already been rounded to 2 decimal places. The zeros are irrelevant. Zeros do not make any difference. If you notice, 1535 from the number is now gone. Okay. Now, few things you should know. It is very important when you are using these functions. If the number of digits is greater than 0, so if you type equal to round, so this is num digits. Okay. If the second argument is greater than 0, the number is rounded to the specified number of decimal places. So we type 2, so it was to 2 decimal places. If the number of digit is 0, that is, you do not put 2, you just put 0, the number is rounded to the nearest integer. So if I select this and I do this, it will be rounded to the nearest integer. See that 0.57 is now moved to this side, and it becomes 43 becomes 44. Let me make this big so it's easier to understand. Yeah, it becomes 43 becomes 44. If the num of digit, let me delete this. If the num digit is less than 0, the number is rounded to the left of the decimal point. Now this is very confusing. I will explain this. Pay attention when I am explaining this, because you may not understand this. Okay. Now, before I do that, let me come here. I've already done this for you. Okay. So this is the number. Now here I have put -1. So -1, -2, and -3. Think of these as tens, hundreds, and thousands. Let me make this big. So when you use -1, the number is rounded to the left of the decimal point for tens. So if you look at this, 43 became 40. -2 is hundreds. So 343 became 300. Thousands. For -3, it became 90,000. So it rounded off to the 1000th position. It rounded off to the 100th position. It rounded off to the 10th position. So remember, I've not seen a practical use of this right now, but yes, you should know, if you're working on this function, you should know what the negative will do that. Perhaps as a data analyst, or perhaps as, let's say, if you become a CA, you may find some use of this, but I just wanted to explain this to you. Now, there are times, okay, before I explain that, let me bring you to this particular table. It is called the rounding direction. Now, you need to understand how Excel rounds the numbers. Do you see this is 0.571 and this is 0.575, 0.576. Look at the last number. It is 1. If it is less than 5, then the rounding will happen below. If it is 5 or greater than 5, the rounding will happen towards the upper side. Yeah, it will round up. In this scenario, it will round down. So always remember, check the last number and then check whether it is between 0 and 5. If it is 0 and 5, then the number will round down. If it is greater than equal to 5, and if you use round, then it will always round up. Okay, so always remember this. Now, having said that, there are a lot of times when you do not want the number to round as per Excel's whims and fancies. You want the number to always round up. In that case, you use the function which is called round up, equal to round up, start bracket, and then let's say this number, okay, comma, number of digits is 2, close bracket, and if you press enter, you get 0.58. So if I did not do that, if I just type equal to round this number, comma 2, see what happened? It rounded down because the number is less than 5. But I don't want the round down to happen. I always want the number to round up. In that case, I use round up. In that case, it went to 580 rather than 570. Just like you have a round up, you can also use round down. So if you type equal to, now let's do one thing, round, and if I choose this number and comma 2, you will notice that it rounded up by default because the number is greater than or equal to 5. But if I use round down, and I choose this number again, and I press the enter key, sorry, 2, comma 2, if I press the enter, it rounded down. So remember, you have an option to round up or round down. Moving on to the next two functions, which is even and odd. Now, if you have understood how roundup function works, then these are very simple to understand. These functions also round up the numbers, but there is a slight difference. Even rounds up to the nearest even integer, and odd rounds up to the nearest odd integer. Let's take an example. Okay, so let's look at this table. Remember, as a financial analyst, even and odd are very useful functions, as it helps round a number and makes it an even or odd number. It eliminates the least significant digits, simplifying the notation, but keeping close to the original value. So if you type equal to even, start bracket, and if you choose this number, and if you close the bracket, you get 4. So it rounded up to the nearest even number. If I did equal to odd, is it went to 5, not 4, because the next closest odd number is 5. Similarly, if I just copy the formula down, you can see what even and odds will return. So these are all even numbers, these are all odd numbers. So remember, this is how even and odds work. Now, these were very simple, very easy to understand. We quickly went through it. Now comes the next 5 functions, which are very, very important. So please pay attention. But let's move on to sheet 3. The first function that we will cover is called subtotal. The subtotal function returns the subtotal value from a range of cells. It makes targeted data analysis a lot easier. Now you may think, why do we need the subtotal function? We already have sum if, count if, average if, etc., etc. Why subtotal? Yeah, the subtotal function is packed with some really powerful features. For example, you can use subtotal to return a sum, average, count, max, and others. Now look at this table, A1 to C12. Look at this table. We will visit this table in a moment. On the right, we have a table where we have publishers all nicely stacked. Avalon, AvanQuest Software, Berkeley, Nintendo. We've got genre, date, quantity, unit sales, etc. Everything is so nicely put. Now, let's say we want to find the total sale of each publisher. Okay, but instead of sum, let's use subtotal. Okay, so how do I do that? Let me move this. Should I put it down? Okay, let's do one thing. Let's create some blank spaces. Okay, Control Y, and Control Y. Okay, this is what we have done. So let's insert in G4, or rather, we'll do it here. Okay, we can do it here also. Let's say is equal to subtotal. Let me zoom it first. One moment. So equal to subtotal, start bracket. Now see the arguments that it is asking for. It is asking for function num. Now let's come to the table on the left. So in subtotal, you can find the average, the count, a, max, min, product. So we are not going to cover product, standard deviation, etc. We'll only stick with average, count, a. So let's say we want to count the number of records on top. Now remember, this is text, so obviously you can't use count. So you have to use count a. Now if you select count a, it is number 3, which is here. Now what is the difference between include hidden and ignore hidden? If you type 3 like this, then you are telling Excel that even if any row is hidden above, include that in your counting. If you specify 102, that means you're telling Excel, ignore the rows which are hidden. Just count the visible rows. So if I select 3 and then I type comma, I select this, close the bracket, I get 3. Now, what if I change it to 103? It doesn't make any difference because nothing is hidden. What if I hide row 3? See what happens. And we get 2. Why did we get 2? Because we said ignore hidden cells, which is 103, and hence it did not count that. Is that clear, guys? It's very, very simple. Okay. Now, similarly, we can have count here, subtotal. Let's say if I want to find sum, I can type subtotal, start bracket, and this time let's find the sum. This function number 9. Okay, comma, and this is the range. Close the bracket, press enter, and you get the sum here. So let me copy this down. It is referring to these 3 cells. Let's copy this here as well. It is referring to these cells. Let me color these so that we know what are the subtotal cells. And here we will copy it again. And this time I will resize it so that it is taking the sum of only these 2. Okay, and let's move the total sales here. And I'm going to copy this here and paste it here. And we have done this here. This also is yellow. Now we have subtotals here. What if I want to find the sum of the total sales? Can I use sum? Yes, I can use sum. But when I use sum, I will have to ensure that either I type equal to sum and I select it like this. Yeah, that is one way of doing it. Or I say equal to sum and then I select the yellow cells. If I do equal to sum and if I select the entire range, what will happen? The values will be added twice. And hence, this is where subtotals come into play. They're very powerful because subtotals will exclude all the subtotal cells and then give you the sum. So if I type equal to subtotal and I want to find sum, so I'll select 9, comma, it doesn't matter whether you want to include hidden or exclude hidden, nothing is hidden. So I selected 9 and the range, I'm going to select this entire range from here to here. And I press the enter key and I get 1904,675. So if I select the yellow cells, okay, I'm getting 17. Why did that happen? Let me check. Oh, yes. Yeah, what is the total? It is 19,04,675. And that is what we got here. So subtotal, what it did was it ignored all the yellow cells. And why did it ignore that? Because that cell had subtotal function in it. So remember that this is one powerful feature. Now, the next function that we will cover, it is again a very powerful function. It is called the sum product function. Okay. Now, I'm sure you must have heard about this when people talk about this on different kind of online and offline forums. So we will cover sum product now. This function returns the sum of products of corresponding ranges or arrays. Let's take an example to understand this. Okay. Right. I have a table with some publisher data, and let's say I want to find the sum of total sales for this publishers. So in column here, what I want to do is I want to find the total sale where the publisher is Avalon Interactive and the genre is shooter. So how do I do that? So I'm going to type equal to sum product. This is a very crucial function, guys. So I would recommend that you concentrate on this. So the first one argument is array. This array argument, you can pass a range as well, but the first array argument whose components you want to multiply and then add. You will understand this when I explain this more. The second array is optional. Array 3 is optional, and so on. It is optional. You can give up to 255 arguments. Okay. So what I will do is I want to, let's say, find the total sales. Okay. Let me, doesn't matter. Okay, I've done this, comma, and this. Okay, let me delete these first. Otherwise, it'll be very confusing for you guys. Okay. Now, I want to find the sum of total sales for publisher Avalon Interactive. So I'll type equal to sum product, start bracket, select this range is equal to Avalon Interactive multiplied by this range, which is equal to shooter, bracket, multiplied by the total sales. What is missing here? Oh yeah, one bracket is missing. And we get the total sales. Now, this is slightly complex. Let me think of a simpler way to explain this. Okay. Now, if I type, let's say, equal to sum product, I'll come to the above formula in a moment. And this range, comma, shooter. One moment. You know what? Let's go back here first. Then I'll come to this. It'll become very easy to understand. Now, when you say table, if I go to quantity here, okay, and if I say unit sales, so these are two different columns. Let me take this example, and then it'll be easier to understand this complex formula. So what happens here? If I type equal to sum product, start bracket, if I select this range, comma, this range, okay, and I close the bracket, what do I get? I get this particular value. Now, how did I get this? Because if I do the sum of this, this is only 19 lakhs. So what exactly is happening here? Now, if I select this range here, and if I press F9, do you remember in the last video I explained about F9? If you press F9, you will see all the values from the quantity are shown in an array. Similarly, if you select this and if you press F9, you will see all the values which are there in the unit sales. So what it does is, it does an array multiplication. 14 is multiplied by 12013, then 16 is multiplied by 123919, and then it is all added. So what is happening here is equal to this into this. You get this value, and let's check what is the sum of this. See, this is the sum. So this is nothing but this multiplied by this. This is nothing but this multiplied by this, and the total of this is this. So this sum product, what it did was it performed a multiplication across rows and then finally gave you the sum. Here we have a comma here. What if instead of comma I put an asterisk sign? Then what happens? I still get that, but what is the difference now? The difference is if you select this together and if you press F9, you will get the column K values. It is no longer showing you the values, individual values of quantity and individual values of unit sales. It is now multiplying 14 by 120, and then it is showing you the value which is here. I hope you have understood this. This is the very simple explanation I've explained. Now I will come to the more complex stuff. I can use sum product just like we use SUMIF, but with a criteria. For example, I want to find the total sum for the genre shooter, which is here, and for the publisher Avalon Interactive. So how do I do that with the sum product? Now let's look at this. What I'm doing here is I'm saying publisher, which is this range, is equal to F20. Now, if I select this and if I press F9, you will see you're getting true, 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 false, false, false. So here it is checking which cell has Avalon Interactive, and it is showing a Boolean value for it. And for the others, it is showing false. Similarly, if you look at this, and if you press F9, it is showing true, false, false. That means it is checking where is the condition meeting. Yeah, and that is how it is calculating the value. And this is it. If you bring this down, you will see how the formula is being calculated. Sum product. Now it will multiply it, and then where it is true, it will multiply those values and it will give you the sum. This is how we arrived at this. Okay, now let me explain something which is called a double negative. Let's take an example of, okay, let's go here. Okay, now using sum product, you can count total occurrences. Okay, let's say shooter in a range, G2 to G16. How do we do that? All you have to do is equal to sum product. And this is what I was trying to do. And then I realized that you will not understand it. And that's why I left it at that. Now, if I select this range here and I type comma, or rather I'll type equal to G24, which is shooter, see what happens. I get 0. Now, why did I get 0 here? Because I'm saying in the genre, it has to be equal to shooter, but I can see shooter here. So I can see a lot of shooters here. But why am I getting 0? Anybody can guess? Okay, so same thing. Whenever in doubt, select the formula, argument, or whatever it is, and press F9 key. And the moment you press F9 key, you get these values, true, false, true, false. Now, obviously, these true, false cannot be converted to a number directly. Okay, so what do we do here? For this, we use something which is called a double negative. The double negative is used to coerce true or false into ones and zeros. And once it is converted to ones and zeros, sum product will be able to calculate the value. So what I will do here is, I will add double negative, 2 minuses, and then I will put this within brackets. Now if I press enter, I get 6. Let me move this up. Now I'm getting, there are 6 cells which have shooters. See this. So this is the importance of double negative. This is very important. You'll see a lot of people using double negatives, so you will know what they are trying to do. Moving on to the last 3 functions, I'll quickly take you through this. Now, before we go to the last 3 functions, I want to reiterate that these functions are for MS Office 365. If you do not have MS Office 365 or an updated MS Office 2021, then you will not be able to test these functions. So I hope you seriously reconsider upgrading to Microsoft Office 365. The first function that we will cover is sequence. The sequence function allows you to generate list of sequential numbers in an array. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. The array can be 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional. It depends on the rows and column arguments that you supply. So if I type, let's say, equal to sequence, and start bracket, you'll see it is asking for rows, columns, start, and step. Okay. Now, what is rows? Rows is the number of rows to return. Okay. And let's take an example here. So if I type sequence, start bracket, I want rows 1, columns 2, start number is 1, and step is 1. Okay, so what is this? I'm saying number of rows to return is 1, columns that I want to return is 2, and the start number is 1, or rather, if I want to explain it easily, then let's say 5, and the step is 1. So if I close this, see what happens, and then I'll explain. I get 5 and 6. Now, why did I get 5 and 6? Because my row is 1. So obviously, there will only be 1 row. I'm saying there'll be 2 columns. So there are 2 columns here. Then I'm saying the number has to start from 5 and the step is 1. That means the next number has to increment by 1. If I type 2 here and press enter, the first number is 5 and the next number is 7. So that's how I increment it. Okay. So now if I want to, let's say, create serial numbers from here, from first to the last row in this range. So how do I do that? You can do that by typing equal to sequence. Now, how many rows are there? So if I highlight this, there are 15 rows. So if I can type equal to sequence, start bracket, 15 rows, comma, only 1 column. I don't want the spill to happen in more than 1 column. Okay, and start is 1 and step is 1. If I close this, if I press enter key, see how it automatically enters the sequence. Now here I counted it. I knew it was 15 and I typed 15. But how do I make this automatic? So what I can do is let's delete this, or rather what I will do is, instead of 15, see how I'm going to use now 2 functions. Now Avalon Interactive is text. To count this text, I have to use count a. Start bracket, select this range and close the bracket and press the enter key. And this is how it will work. Once again, I'm going to delete everything here. I'm going to type equal to sequence, start bracket, rows is count a, start bracket, this range, this will return the total count of the rows, comma, I want only 1 column, so 1, the number has to start with 1, and the it has to increment by 1. Close bracket, and I get the sequence. So remember, this is what the sequence does. Now, what if I add a new record here? Let's just SID. See what happens. Oh, it's not part of the table. One moment. What I will do here, instead of count A, now what I will do is I will select this column like this. See, now if I delete this everything from here, I type something, we'll keep on adding that. Obviously, now you'll notice that every time I'm typing something, the next number is getting generated automatically. If you do not want the number to automatically generate, but it should only generate when you type something, change the count A to -1 because it is including the publisher heading as well. When you do that, it will not generate the next number. So every time you type something, the sequence will automatically generate. So this is another good function that you can use. Okay, moving on to the next function, which is the aggregate function. For that, let's go to sheet 4. Okay, just like we had subtotal function, here the aggregate function returns the aggregate calculation using average, count, max. So this is the table. So here we also had a table, right? So this table, the difference between this table and this table you'll understand shortly. But here we have a function number and we have functions. There are a lot of functions which are not covered there, but it is covered here. Okay, so here I have a table which has some data. You will notice that there is an error here. Let me make this big. Come down to this table, which is in row 23. You will see that we have quantity, unit sales, and we are multiplying this to get total sales. But on this cell, I'm directly dividing it by 0 so that I could create an error. I did this deliberately. There's a reason why I did this. Okay. Now, what I will also do is I will hide row number 28. I will hide that. Okay. Now, what if I want to find the total sum? You may say that let's use subtotal with 9 as one of the arguments, which is for sum. But if I do that, you will see that I'm not getting the correct result. So if I type is equal to subtotal, that's what we did there as well. Okay, start bracket, we'll select sum. And then if we select this range, and if we close this, if you press enter, we get error. It's not finding the sum. And this is where the aggregate function comes in. Okay, let's understand this. Let's do that same exercise here. So I'm going to change, or rather I'll type afresh, aggregate, start bracket. Now I want to find the sum. So I will select 9 and then I press comma. See what happens. I'm getting these 8 options. These are the 8 options which you can see here. If you choose 0, then it will ignore nested subtotal and aggregate functions. If you want to ignore hidden rows, nested subtotal and aggregate function, choose 1. If you want to ignore error values, nested subtotal and aggregate functions, choose 2. Okay. If I choose, let's say 3, which is this, that means I'm saying ignore hidden rows, error values, nested subtotal and aggregate function. And then if I select that, this is the 3 and the range. This is the range that I want the sum for. If I close the bracket, if I press enter, I get the sum. So what all did this function ignore? I chose 3, which is this option. So it is not only ignored the hidden row, which is 28, we hit the 28th row, but it also ignored subtotal and aggregate. So here, this is subtotal. So it did not add that. So if you do a manual check, it added these values and this and this. It ignored the rest. So this is the aggregate. Okay, you can similarly use aggregate. Here we found the sum. You can use count, average, count A, max, minimum. Go ahead and experiment that. Coming to the last function of this session, which is rand array. Now, the Excel rand array function generates an array of random numbers between 2 values. The syntax is very simple. Okay, so if I type equal to rand array, start bracket, it is asking for rows, columns, minimum number, maximum number, and integer. If you notice, all of them have square brackets. That means all of the arguments are optional. So we can, if you close the bracket and if you press enter, it gives a number. So it gives you a random decimal number. Okay, now let's understand what are the different arguments and how we can use it. Okay, why did I get the random decimal number? Because if I look at the arguments, the last argument is an integer argument. The integer argument means if it is true, then you'll get a whole number. If it is false, you will get a decimal. By default, the value is false. So if I type comma, 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 I'm not specifying any of the values. And if I type true, I want this, and I press enter key. See how I got 1. I did not get a decimal. If I type false, I will get a decimal. So remember, true is for a whole number, false is for decimals. Now, coming to the other values. Let's say if I type 1, which is rows, and if I press enter, nothing happens because there's only 1 row. What if I, sorry, that was my mistake. Let's do it here now. Let's come to this cell. If I type equal to rand array, rows will be 5 and columns will be 5. Okay, and the minimum number should be, let's say 5, and the maximum number should be 10. And I only want whole numbers, integers. And I close the bracket. See what happens. It created an array of 5 rows and 5 columns, and it gave random numbers between 5 and 10. So none of the value will be more than 10 and less than 5. So this is rand array. Very, very important function. You will see a lot of questions being asked in LinkedIn about rand array. Yeah, so go ahead, experiment with different values, and you will get to understand how this works. Coming to the homework, guys.